Okay, folks, this is an introductory to InDesign, and we're just going to be talking a little bit about the workspace and a few tools to kind of get you started that would correspond to chapters 1 and 2 in your textbook. This is when you fire up the software, this is generally how it's going to look, and you are going to see previous projects that you've been working on in case you want to just shortcut into those guys. But if you want to create something brand new, on the left-hand side, click the icon that says Create New, and that will get this dialog box up and running. Within the dialog box, there are some presets for mobile, web, and print. I usually always, by default, go to the print area, and I don't necessarily use these templates because I'm almost always modifying the parameters of the project that I'm going to be working on. But if you did want to just create an 8.5 by 11 sheet, then that would obviously be letter here. And then they have a legal pad dimension or a tabloid or all these different guys. In fact, you can view more presets if you continue down that path. Up at the top here, you can rename your file that you're working on. I'm going to call this project-1. And I know that we are going to be working with pixels because we're creating an Instagram story, and the dimensions that are specific for an Instagram story currently, and this does change periodically, so keep that in mind. I believe, let me double check my document really quickly just to be sure. Hold the phone 1 second, folks. I'm going to go into my project PDF, which you should actually have on Blackboard. But yeah, 1080 by 1920. So I was just confirming that. So the width is 1080 by 1920. I'm going to turn facing pages off because we're only creating one art document or a document with one page. So this really isn't necessary, but almost always I remove this, so I click it off so that it is not engaged. And we don't need to worry about column gutters or columns at this point. So 1080 by 1920 pixels, and I removed facing pages, and I also named the document project-1. And we hit create, and this is what you should be seeing. At this point, since this is an introduction to Adobe InDesign, I just kind of want to talk about it briefly. It's a composite application that brings assets, whether they're visual or from other Adobe programs, into one document, and it sort of brings everything to one consistent level. So in other words, if you bring in an image that's low quality or high quality, it's going to try to export everything at a similar quality, and then you can kind of play with the export parameters so that you can create a smaller PDF that might be able to get emailed to a potential client or someone. So essentially, it takes all these assets and ingredients from other places, and it brings them together and spits it out in one cohesive document at a consistent quality, which can be very, very powerful. Especially, so for example, if you're making a magazine publication or a layout, you might be emailing a client or folks, and they might be sending you documents and image files that are PNGs, JPEGs, PDFs. You can take all of those things and you can put it into your stew. I really like the crock pot metaphor. You can take all these ingredients and put it in your crock pot so that you can create a really good chili. On the left-hand side are going to be your tools that you're going to be working with primarily. At the top, you're going to see logistical details and information that are relative to the tools that you have selected at the time. For example, right now there's nothing selected, but it's showing XY coordinates, a width and a height of a potential object, the rotation degree of a potential object, the opacity, whether that object has a fill or a stroke surrounding it. So yeah, this is good stuff, and it changes sometimes dependent on the tool that you have selected. So keep that in mind. On the right-hand side, you have all of your docs. So for example, if you click on Pages, this is a publication software program intended to create magazines and books and print media. We're actually only going to be working with one page, but with this icon down here, you do have the ability to add pages that are the exact same dimension as the previous page or initial page that you made. There's also a master page that you can dive into, and you can add page numbers, or you can add graphics that you want to be consistent on all of the pages that you create. Layers, it just goes without saying that as a designer and using software, you should be very aware of layer management and having a layer for typography, for example, or having a layer for content or images. It really just kind of depends on the project that you're working on. But if you want to create additional layers, you use this icon right there. The assets that you're going to be bringing into InDesign, they need a file path in order to find that object so that they can communicate, so that the software can communicate with the files that it will eventually export. And so within this links panel, you can sort of sometimes relink or correct a broken link. But anything that you bring into this project, it will eventually show up here. And then there are some other palettes that we can talk about a little bit later, but this is like logistical detail stuff. Obviously, color is really important. And by the way, because this is a CMYK application, by default, or excuse me, because this is a publications application, CMYK is going to be the default color space, because that's how a document gets printed in an Epson printer, for example. And then your swatch. So yeah, I also wanted to mention that up here in the top right corner, you can change your workspace. And my preferred workspace for you all while you're working in this class with me is Essentials Classic. But if you're working with, for example, an interactive, or you're asked by a client or a boss that you need to create an interactive PDF, then you can go to that workspace, and a lot of these things that you might need will be there. But I think that this is the bread and butter place for you to always start with. So on the left-hand side, let's go through some of these tools really quickly. And I'm actually going to skip down to this one first, the rectangle tool, because I think that's important that you understand that, that you can create an object or a rectangle with this particular tool. It doesn't have to be a rectangle. Look, you can create an ellipse or a polygon. The rectangle is obviously really popular. And once you've created that object, you can change the stroke. You can say it shouldn't have a stroke at all. You can give it a magenta stroke. You can increase that stroke to 9 points so that it's more visible. You can give this object a black fill. And with that black arrow tool or selection tool, you can then move this object around. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I think it's really important for all Adobe applications, is that there, if you go to View, Guides and Grids, and then if you go to Snap Document Grid, oops, and then if you go to Show Document Grid, I think this is really important. Notice how when you move this around, the object is snapping to the grid. And also when you're grabbing these handles and changing the size of this object, it's by default going to sort of snap to this grid And I'm going to zoom in and just kind of show you in better detail what's going on. So again, using the black arrow tool, I select it, and then I can start kind of changing the dimensions slightly with these guys. Of course, if I want to make a copy of this, all I do is hit Command C and then Command V. I can make a copy, position it in accordance with the grid, the document grid, and then I can change the fill, and I can change, whoops, the stroke. I keep messing that up. Okay, one last time. Let's change the stroke to yellow. So yeah, you can modify these objects and duplicate them pretty easily. Next tool I wanted to show you was the white arrow tool. And essentially you can, I'm going to delete one of these guys. We don't need two of them, right? With the white arrow tool, notice how when I just hover over this object, these anchors make themselves visible. I currently have snap to grid on, so I can actually grab those anchors, and I can just kind of move them around, and they're communicating with that backdrop grid really nicely. As you progress as a designer, you're going to realize how important that is and how important the grid is to solving these visual communication problems quickly and efficiently. So yeah, the moving around these anchor points is very, very important. If you're trying to create unique objects that will eventually hold composited visual information. And that statement will make more sense a little bit later in this tutorial. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to use the text tool. I selected, of course, the type tool rather. And then just drag on your artboard, and then the cursor starts to blink, and then you can use your keyboard and type in some text. I'm going to zoom in. I'm actually going to go back to the black arrow or selection tool. And if I select this object, notice how it's saying 153 to 207 pixels, so I can modify this object to sort of accommodate the amount of text that I have within this quote unquote text box and make adjustments. The next thing that I can do is if I double click into this object and select the letters, you have to have those letters selected. I can change the font to Helvetica. I can make it bold. I can make it larger. I can give it some leading. So again, and notice how this dialog or information area of the interface changed as soon as I selected the text tool. If I go back to the black arrow tool, it's going to go back to something that you're more familiar with. And then if I want to, I can again just dive back into that box, and it's going to show these options once more. So that's the text tool, or type tool rather. Lines are pretty self-explanatory. You can drag, create a line. You can change the color of that stroke, and you can also change the size of that stroke. Let's see. This is one of my favorite tools within InDesign because it's essentially your bread and butter. This is what makes InDesign so wonderful. It's the technical term is a rectangle frame tool. But again, it's an object, so you can change the parameters and move it around. If you have snap to grid on, this box is of course going to snap to the document grid. But what you do is you select it, and then while it's selected, you hit Command D, okay, and then that'll bring up this dialog box for place. If you want to do it manually, select the rectangle, go to Object, or excuse me, File, Place, and notice there's the shortcut right there, Command D, and then you can place any graphic or object. So that was a JPEG, I believe, that I just put in here. But I could also, if I wanted to, Bollinger Design. I'm just going to show you that you can drop a PSD or a Photoshop file in there too. So it's quite flexible what you can drop. So a Photoshop file, you can drop a variety of, even an Illustrator file, you can drop it in here. And then after you have the image in here, and obviously that's a very close-up detail of this image because the image is it's great quality. So you can select the object and then come up here to Object, Fill, or let's try Fit Content Proportionally first. So that kind of shows you, here's the frame, and this is the image, and InDesign is trying to show you the full image. But sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you just want the image shown through a window. So you have to go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. And again, I can dive into this object and you can kind of see the perimeter or the surrounding of the original JPEG file. And while it's selected, you can actually toggle it around to accommodate whatever view you prefer. So this is really powerful, again, because you can take lots and lots of different image and file types and composite them together to create a beautiful publication or PDF or flyer or poster or whatever it is that you're making that you want to eventually be a printable document. And again, it doesn't even have to be printable for this particular project today. We're actually going to be exporting an Instagram story intended for the digital realm. It's not going to be printed at all. But this is still just a very valuable composite, I would say, / collage tool. So that's it. I would say that's enough information for you guys to have today regarding InDesign. Although, hold on one second, I want to show you guys the hand tool as well. So on my machine, I'm using a smart mouse, so I can actually use my index finger to kind of move around the interface. But you may have a regular mouse, so this hand tool, which has the shortcut H, can be pretty handy because then you can grab your page and you can kind of move it around depending on what you want to look at. The zoom tool is pretty handy as well, but I have to be honest, what I usually do is if I want to see the entire page all together all at once, so in other words, kind of standing back and and looking at your work, you can hit Command 0 like so. And then if you want to zoom in on an object, all you have to do is select it and then hit Command+. And then you're going to zoom into that guy so you can see what's really going on. And obviously you can zoom back out as well. So that's a beginning introduction to the interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this document open actually, but what I'm going to do is go over here and show you a project 1 example that I had actually started and completed. And this represents some of the screenshots that are within the project PDF that you have or that you've been reviewing on Blackboard. This was the finished product. But we're actually going to go through the process a bit more in detail here in this example. So yeah, this is where we're starting, and we're going to be ending with something that looks similar like to this. I also wanted to note that this just happens to be my diagram or sketch. So additionally, if you look at that project PDF, this was the sketch that I made, and I really encourage all of my students, no matter what art studio or design studio class you're taking with me, to start in a place like this with a sketchbook and a simple pen or maybe 2 pens, and make some iterations and kind of brainstorm your way through the project to figure out a good solution. Your diagram and your process might look different compared to mine, and that's perfectly normal. So don't worry about it. But this happens to be the iteration that I am going to be choosing to go with today. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with this rectangle frame tool. I'm going to click in the gray area. So instead of dragging and creating a rectangle, I'm just going to click in the gray area, and then I can say, okay, I need it to be 1080 by 480. And 480 times 4, the height equals the height of our artboard, and you're going to see that in a second. The other thing I'm going to do, because we're working with pixels and not inches, is I'm actually going to turn snap to grid off, and I also don't want to see the grid right now. I just kind of I want to work more fluidly. So I'm going to drop this at the top. I'm going to copy and paste it. Okay, now I have 2 of them. I'm going to copy those. And now I have 4 of them. And that's kind of like, I'm going to keep this one. I'm going to keep that one. But I'm going to use these 2 to create 3 triangles, okay? And I'm going to create those triangles with the pen tool. I haven't talked about that quite yet when we were chit-chatting about the tools on the left-hand side. But essentially, it's really easy. You can create vector graphics with the pen tool, and they can also hold images, all right? Similar to how the rectangle frame tool will hold an image. You can actually create a crazy object, you know, that is just, look at it, you know, it can be anything. And then you just got to make sure you close that loop. If you notice, when I got to the end, and I'll try that again, watch this. So I'm going to close the loop this time. Watch the icon, the pen icon, and the way that little circle appears. That means you're good to go, okay? Because you have to close that loop. It has to be a complete and solid closed object. So now I have this, and I can do the same thing. I can hit Command D. I can select this PSD image, and I can drop it in there. And object, fill frame proportionally, and then I can actually use that arrow tool. I can rearrange things too. This is really a lot of fun, and like, I love InDesign. It's very, very powerful. And then of course you can, I'm using the wrong tool, that's why I'm having trouble. Black arrow tool, I want to dive into this object, and then I can nudge this graphic around again within that window. Obviously, we're doing something a little bit more simple though over here. This one we don't have to worry about. And you know, I'm not being specific today. I'm just dropping in images to show you guys how to format things. You know, some very basic operations in InDesign. But if I come up here to Object and Fit Content Proportionally, it's going to show the whole image. If I come over here, Object, and Fill Frame Proportionally, it's going to show as much of the image as it can within that window. And then you might have to make a decision as you toggle things around. So that one's filled. Now we have 1, 2, 3 triangles to make. I'm going to do that with the pen tool. I'm going to do that quickly too, if you guys don't mind. 1, 2, 3. Again, closing the loop. 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right. So now I'm going to hover with the white arrow tool because I need to grab those anchor points and nudge them around. So, but it's kind of funny, like, there we go, I got it. Okay, so this should just kind of like, see how it kind of like, it wants to hop on top of that other anchor. And look at, dunk, it just kind of pops right in there. All right. There it goes again. It's just kind of popping right in there. It's a very subtle thing. Sometimes it takes 1 or 2 tries. It's fine. Sometimes it wants to be difficult too. That's life. All right. So now same thing. Popping in there. Sometimes when you overthink it, it makes it more difficult than it has to be. If there's some kind of weird simpatico relationship that you have to have with the software. But yeah, now it's working. I guess it's because I'm being nice to the software or something. I want to move those triangles out of the way temporarily, and I want to remove those backdrop rectangles. So what I'm going to do is just hold Shift and nudge them to the left. Right, and I could even align those guys. Look at this. Dunk. All right. Whoops, except I forgot that I'd already removed those. Wait. 1 second, guys. Okay, so yeah, these are actually the triangles that need to be removed. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, those triangles are, so it was a little deceptive. I didn't see that what I wanted to keep had been left behind, and what I removed I wanted to delete anyway. So I'm going to hit Command D for place, and I'm just going to continue down this path. And forgive me, I'm going to start going through this pretty quickly because I think you guys got the hang of this. But yeah, once you're familiar with the software, you can also scale these. Like I don't want this white margin on the left, so I'm going to scale that image in there a little bit and adjust it. And I'm doing that by diving into the object a little bit. Okay, so now I have this triangulated window to contend with. And I'm going to grab something a little more colorful. I didn't always work with a lot of color in my work, my process, my drawings, paintings, whatever you want to call them. So I'm gonna, and notice how, see that image didn't fill the space. So I have to select the object, fitting, fill frame proportionally. Okay, got a couple more circumstances that we need to do. And then we're home free. Let's see. These are actually some interesting renderings. So I want to show different file types that you can throw in there. You know what? I don't think I have an, I wish I had. I'm just gonna throw, just looking for something kind of interesting to put in there. Put a photo of me teaching in there, why not? All right, whatever. Fit content, no, that's not working. Fill frame, yes, that's fine. I feel like I need to adjust this. You can't even see my face, but there I am, kind of chit-chatting with students. And the last one, let's make it art again. And again, for your project, it might be more focused on a particular piece, some details or some process. I don't know. It could be a business. I don't know. You need to make that decision about what you want to promote. But that's pretty much what, I mean, this is an Instagram story, so it's a promotional tool. So we have everything set, looks pretty good to me. The only thing I want to confirm is that, yep, see, these triangles still have a black stroke associated with them. And if I select one of them, see, there's that black stroke. If I select all of them, because all of them have different strokes assigned to them, some of them do have a black stroke, some of them don't. That's why it's looking a little funny up here, but we can still assign all of them to have no stroke. And then the next thing we need to do is hit Command 0 so we can see everything. We need to save so that we don't lose our work. Save that on the desktop. And the next thing we need to do is come up here to File, Export, because now we're going to export the document as a PNG. PNG project 1, and let's give it a unique name called test. We're going to send it to our desktop as a PNG. Obviously, there are a lot of different options here when you're exporting, this being one of the primary and more common ones, but I'm not a big fan of JPEGs. I don't prefer that, so I'm going to go with PNG. So test, you can change some parameters here. This is which pages you want to export. We only have one page currently. Maximum image quality, yes. Resolution, 150 is good. If we were going to print, I would definitely say 300 dpi. Color space, RGB, and the reason being is because it's going on a phone, and a phone is RGB color space. In other words, it renders color with red, green, and blue, not CMYK. Now I'm going to hit export. And give that some time to think. And right now it's basically linking to all those original files that I had in all these different places on my machine. And it's basically, again, we're taking those ingredients, we're putting them in the crock pot, and it's spitting out a PNG stew. that we can see. Okay, let's track that down. And we called the file test. There it is. And there you have it. So with this document, you would airdrop it to yourself, or you would email it to yourself. And you can kind of see the quality is not bad. Look at that. So this quality is a little less because it's just a plain old JPEG. I think someone sent this photo of me when I was teaching a few years back, and I liked it. So, but yeah, the quality, you can kind of see the way it's trying to marry all these different qualities together and spit something out that's relatively consistent. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I look forward to seeing how you guys attack Project One and how you experiment with the software at the get-go. I think one thing I'd like to mention also with this particular project that another student did, they were using the pen tool with Snap to Grid to create these beautiful vectors, and and they were using these mirrored systems and design that you could do as well. And I showed you what tool that you would have to use to do that, and that's the pen tool to create these clean graphics that you can arrange on layers. And that's it. Thank you.